everyone. Welcome back to Bond-tober. It is now the start of the second season, and I am very excited. After the smash success of Bond-tober last October, and thanks to all of you, I'm back with another season. Now, what to do this season since I've covered all the films before? Well, I had an idea about that. Rankings. Because one thing we Bond fans love to do is rank things. But we have to really get started on this in the right way. We have to get into the right mood. Just something to set the tone for the rest of all this and get into the Bond spirit. And what better way to do that than the songs?
Goldfinger with a view to a kill.
Most, if not all, the Bond films have memorable songs, both for better and for worse. But today we're going to take a look at the top 10. But before I do that, let's talk about the honorable mentions. The Living Daylights is one of those songs that I referred to in my review of The Living Daylights as sort of a Frankenstein song, something that was kind of mixed together at the last minute and gives such a dissonant sound that it's actually kind of catchy. I really like this song and I play it all the time, but it just didn't quite crack the top 10 in my opinion.
We have all the time in the world.
Next up is We Have All the Time in the World and the John Barry theme from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Both are really great, wonderful pieces of music that go with a wonderful, great Bond film. But again, they just don't quite crack the top 10 because one is more of an instrumental love ballad and the other one is an instrumental title sequence without forcing the lyrics of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Boy, that would have been a real mouthful for John Barry, let me tell you.
Golden eye, I found his weakness.
Lastly, we have GoldenEye, sung by the iconic Tina Turner. This was the start of a fresh, new 1990s vibe of James Bond, which carried over fairly well, but as we'll see in one of our later choices, didn't always translate well into success. And now we come to the dishonorable mentions. Well, I'm gonna need a sip of this. Die Another Day. Ugh. I just can't get into Madonna. I never have and I never will, and this song certainly doesn't help matters. It's a grating early 2000s mesh of techno and silly lyrics that I just don't get.
We're an all-time high.
All-time high. Yeah, this one's kind of boring, guys. I'm sorry.
Just like the moonraker goes.
Moonraker. I remember none of this song. Do you? And with the worst Bond song of all time being Another Way to Die from Quantum of Solace. Oh my god. I will say this. The opening riff was amazing until that damn piano kicked in. After that, I was completely lost. It was a cacophony of noise, and it just did not suit the Bond film well and left a really sour taste in the mouths of audiences as they were going into this film, which ultimately would leave a bad taste in people's mouths anyway. And now, without further ado, here are the official entries. Okay, so I'm kind of cheating on this one a little bit, seeing as though this song comes at the end credits of Tomorrow Never Dies, and Sheryl Crow was ultimately given the job of providing the main title sequence. But unfortunately, her song is kind of done in by the fact that it's not woven into David Arnold's incredible score for the film. In fact, it was a very last-minute decision, as the producers just couldn't quite figure out what kind of song they wanted to lead the film off with. Ultimately, Sheryl Crow's version was picked due to her commercial viability at the time, But we lost out on possibly one of the best Bond songs in a David Arnold written song, in fact, with Surrender. Katie Lang was one of those artists who was sort of underground at the time and was burgeoning on becoming a star, but whether or not it was her own image or whether or not her records didn't sell well is basically anybody's guess. But being the 1990s, you could probably take a pretty good guess as to what that was. Surrender is a beautiful evocation of Shirley Bassey. The lyrics are great. They tie into the theme of the film. And all around, it's just a huge punch when you get the movie going. And like I said in my review, thank God for YouTube, for people are able to now edit the film properly into the opening credit sequence, and it really gets you pumped. Unlike the Sheryl Crow, which is fine, but sort of is a little too quiet for too long, and tries to deliver its punch too late. This one brings the vocals, it brings that big brassy sound that you come to expect from James Bond. It's just fantastic. A lot of people may disagree with me on this one, considering that this is only the latest James Bond song, but after I listened to it a few times, I just can't help but feel like this is a hypnotic, beautiful ballad that really does fit the tone of the film very well. It's no secret that a lot of people were surprised that the Bond songs have been taken more of a ballad direction in the wake of Adele's Skyfall. But however, I think No Time to Die was a perfect choice, and Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas were the absolute perfect people to deliver it. And I was very happy on Oscar night when the film won for Best Original Song. Congrats to the two. You guys did a marvelous job. This is one for the ages. Plus, production and orchestration by Hans Zimmer, always a plus. This song, let me tell you, when I was a kid, I originally didn't like it. I felt it was very slow and a little too washy for my taste. However, as soon as I became a teenager and began to appreciate music and orchestration and production and vocals and just the whole shebang of music in general, this one just knocks me out of the park every time I hear it. John Barry had a really tough time coming up with the introduction for this song, that beautiful high violin sound that almost leads you into this dreamlike state of a netherworld, almost as if James Bond has truly died or that death would be the theme of the film. Now ultimately, the film doesn't quite support it, but the song itself is amazing. And the fact that Frank Sinatra even allowed his daughter to sing this after he was courted for the position, Nancy really delivered, and bravo to her because she had a really hard time recording the song herself due to her nerves. When you're listening to that track, you just can't tell. It sounds completely natural, she's wonderfully placed, and it just lets you in on a really great ride. And ultimately, this has climbed the ranks much, much more than others to be one of my favorites.
Say live and let die.
This song is awesome. I just love it. I love Paul McCartney. I love Wings, and being a Beatle fan, it was great to know that he could succeed on his own after the band, and this was an early piece of evidence to support that statement. And I love that this song just plays up and down. It goes from a slow melodic to a very fast rock pace, and it really is benefited by Maurice Binder's title sequence, and it really carries through the film into the score, which was also written by George Martin, the producer of the Beatles. It's just one of those songs that anytime it's played, either in my iPod in a queue, or if it's at a bar, everybody starts singing it or at least taps along. It's one of those great songs, and it was the first James Bond song to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. As I said in my review, I think it should have won. It lost to The Way We Were, which, nothing against Marvin Hamlish, but Barbara Streisand sung it, and one of these things is not like the other. So, bravo to you, Sir Paul, and thank you for Live and Let Die. All right, this song is so good. This is just one of those bang your head rock songs that you could just let your hair go crazy. If my hair was longer, I probably would, but as it is, not so much. This is one of those songs that is pure commercialism in the James Bond film series. But what was great about it was not only was it one of the last times Duran Duran ever recorded together, it was just one of the most perfect highs they could have gone out on. John Barry is really brilliant in his score for this film that he's able to weave it so seamlessly into the fabric of his score, and he plays it both as an exciting bit or even as a slow romantic bit, which that's very hard to do. But he pulls it off with aplomb, and Duran Duran just belted it out of the park. This is great.
Nobody does it better.
Okay. Coming back to Marvin Hamlish, ironically, he was brought into the score to bring a little bit of a fresh taste after John Barry couldn't return to the film due to tax issues. And he brought this really cool disco dance vibe to the whole score. And not only was that evident in Bond 77, it was also evident a little bit in his 1970s kind of ballad writing for Nobody Does It Better. Co-written by Carol Bayer Sager. This is a wonderful song, and it's surprisingly emotional for a James Bond film, especially for the time. And it was especially what they needed, especially after you came off that huge high with the parachute going off. It was wonderful to come back down a little bit and just let the music take you. And Carly Simon has got pipes for days. I mean, she is just one of those vocalists where you know you're going to get something great. And I think her talents just elevated the song up into the stratosphere. And lo and behold, this film was also nominated for Best Original Song at the Academy Awards. It did not win, sadly, but I think it was a worthy nominee and one of the best Bond songs of all time.
Goldfinger.
This is the absolute, gold standard by which all James Bond songs are measured. It's big, it's brassy, and it's smooth, and it's witty. And all of that comes from brilliant writing by Leslie Bricusse and Anthony Newley, who, as I mentioned before, would go on to write the songs for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But the key to this whole song's success, and I dare even say the film's success, was Shirley Bassey giving, not golden, but platinum vocals. She just belts it out to her heart's content, and it's hard not to get sucked in yourself. It's very easy to just sing along and belt along and just completely fall in love with it, just as you fall in love with Goldfinger. This is just one of the best.
So he strikes like
Thunderball is really one of those songs that for me is the quintessential James Bond songs, and it's very high on the list for that reason. This is big and brassy and smooth and jazzy, and Tom Jones is one of those great performers that you always know you're going to get the absolute best out of him. And as many people know, this song was a particularly tough challenge for him, especially on the last note singing the final Thunderball. In fact, he held his note for so long and so high that you actually hear the audio trail off because Tom Jones actually fainted when recording it in the booth. But unfortunately, because of that, they had only the one take, and thank goodness, because this take is great. I think it's a beautiful piece of orchestration, and the music itself, the melody, almost kind of fits when you're thinking of underwater, of thinking of intrigue and suspense and espionage. This is really, it was a stroke of genius on the part of John Barry, and as we all know, it was actually another late addition. There were several candidates considered, including a song called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang fine, but it just ain't Thunderball. And as many of us have discovered in our research, Johnny Cash also recorded a country version of his own version of Thunderball, which is a curious little ditty that I actually find quite catchy, but obviously would have been vastly out of place in a James Bond film. So, this is a perfect, perfect Bond song.
Coldest blood runs through my veins. You know my name.
As most of you know, watching Bond-tober Season 1, Casino Royale is basically my favorite James Bond film. It has it all. And one of the great things about it was You Know My Name by singer Chris Cornell. This is one of those songs by David Arnold, finally really perfecting his Bond songs that it just couldn't be missed for the main title sequence. Now, he wrote some songs for Die Another Day and for The World Is Not Enough, and those films are very mixed in quality. This one is just fantastic, and it is beautifully encapsulating the theme of early James Bond, the young James Bond, the virile, untrained, undisciplined 007. And I think this really captures the loneliness and the yearning that Daniel Craig actually managed to successfully inject into his own characterization of James Bond. And so, you know my name. It was also brilliant from a reboot standpoint because Casino Royale is, in a sense, a reboot. And the title itself is very daring. You Know My Name. That clues the audience into what's going on. Is you know my name, but we're going to do things just a little different. And so, coming from my favorite James Bond film is my second James Bond favorite song.
Let the sky fall when it crumbles.
This song is bliss. I think this song is beautiful. It's mysterious and it's emotional, and yet it's exciting and unpredictable. It's that song that beautifully encapsulates everything 007, and it's just one of those songs that I listen to all the time, and I listened to it endlessly after it came out, and I was praying upon praying that this film would win the Academy Award, and lo and behold, it did win Best Original Song for Adele Atkins and her co-writer Paul Epworth. It's a brilliant song, and one thing I would like to note is that this song, it was discovered, is actually a very subtle rearrangement of the original James Bond theme by Monty Norman and John Barry. It just played in a different key and a different tempo. And I was a little worried for a while. I thought, oh, people might accuse her of plagiarism. But actually, no. They were better songwriters than that, and they were able to twist it around so that it feels familiar, but not plagiarized. It feels fresh and original, and that's exactly what Skyfall was as well as a film. And I just can't imagine Skyfall without it. I don't think Thomas Newman would have stood a chance without having a song like this under his belt for writing the score. Skyfall really is the best James Bond song in my opinion. And that wraps up part 1 of this part 2 video. Come join me next as we take a look at the best James Bond vehicles. Until then, I'm Jim Crowley. This is Bond-tober. Hello and welcome to part 2 of the season premiere of Bond-tober. Coming off the heels of the James Bond songs, I was trying to think what would pair very well for this two-parter, and I began to think, well, whenever I get into my car and plug in the aux cord into my phone, I often play the James Bond songs. And, of course, you can't have a James Bond film without a very, very cool vehicle. Therefore, we're going to talk about the top 10 James Bond vehicles. And they are a classy bunch, aren't they? Dead last at number 10 is the Mach Mustang from Diamonds Are Forever. This isn't one of those gadget-laden cars that you often find in the James Bond series, and Mustang is a very unusual brand for the James Bond films, but in this case it really works well, as it's Tiffany Case's car during the Las Vegas portions of the film. And I find that the exciting chase through the strip of Las Vegas in this vehicle is very apropos. Even though I don't like Las Vegas much as a location for the James Bond film, I do like this car chase, and I particularly love this stunt, as botched as it is. As I discussed in my review, this stunt was botched because one side of the car was filmed and the other side of the car was filmed coming out on the other side without a natural break. They tried to cover this with a very quick insert, and a lot of fans do pick up on this, that this was a botched stunt, but the car itself made up for it, and the Mach Mustang has so much attitude, and I'm a sucker for Mustangs. Therefore, I couldn't see myself leaving it off this list. The Aston Martin DBS V12 from Casino Royale. Once again, we're going with a gadget-laden less car. This one does feature a GPS tracking device and a weapon and a defibrillator. These are not your typical James Bond gadgets, but they do feature in the plot very consistently, and even saves James Bond's life at one point. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to see a beautiful car like this destroyed, it's featured in one of the coolest ever stunts ever captured on film and for James Bond. This is one of those cars that can get the job done, look great, and, as it turns out, wreck great as well. The Acrostar from Octopussy. This particular vehicle has an interesting history with the Bond films, as this was originally meant to take place in Moonraker, but unfortunately the budget was beginning to swell for Moonraker and they had to downsize several stunts and scenes in order to stay on budget and on time. Now, did that really work? No. But it gave the filmmaker something to keep in the bank should an opportunity arise to use the Acrostar, and for Octopussy, the pre-credit sequence was the perfect place for it. A very zippy little stunt plane, it has it all. Maneuverability, and, as it turns out, a very small gas tank. But that's small potatoes compared to the absolute majesty of this opening sequence, and the Acrostar is what really made it something special. The BMW Z3 from GoldenEye. Now, this is one of those cars that is very controversial in the Bond community, as a lot of people didn't like that Bond moved away from the Lotus or the Aston Martin in favor of the BMW. Now, it is a very surprising choice, but in the 1990s, BMW was gaining a reputation for building very high-class quality sports cars, and the Z3 is no exception. From the beautiful blue exterior paint job to the beautiful tan interior, this is a car that anybody would want to have just on the road in general. In fact, one of our dear friends has one in her garage, and I love to just look at it and fantasize about driving it. Now, the Z3 is gadget-laden and has several things, including Stinger torpedoes hidden behind the headlights. The problem is with this car is we never get to see those gadgets in action, and as disappointing as that is, it does make for a very fun corgi toy, like I showed you previously. And here she is again. I must warn you again, if you have that toy and you have the missiles, please be careful when you use them. You will lose them. Tracy's Mercury Cougar from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Going from a gadget-laden car to once again a gadget-less car. However, this car is very important as it features in one of the best action sequences in the film of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and a vastly underappreciated one at that. This is one of those cars that is American in build, but very European in style. especially for the sequence with Bond driving through the village being shot at and Tracy being his pilot for the sequence. It lends for some very interesting dynamics as Tracy is the one behind the wheel and she has to get them out of trouble. And of course it's because this car runs out of gas and is about to get stuck in a snowstorm that leads to one of the most important moments in the James Bond film. I just could not see myself leaving it off this list. In fact, with several cars on this list, and as we'll see later on, I was very lucky to see this car in person at the Pearson Auto Museum in Los Angeles, California. When I saw Tracy's, there was music playing of We Have All the Time in the World, and admittedly, it did bring a tear to my eye, as I think it does telegraph one of the saddest moments in the Bond films, and it was because of this car that it actually led to the development of such moment. Therefore, it deserves its place. Little Nelly, from You Only Live Twice. Going back to the airborne gadgets, this is one of those magnificent little zippy gyrocopters that seem like junk on the outside, but really pack a punch. Little Nelly has it all. A beautiful striking design, beautiful colors, and an array of just such magnificent weapons that could easily take down any assailant who dares cross her path. I love James Bond's attitude towards this gadget anyway. He is always usually very dismissive of Q's gadgets and doesn't always have the greatest respect for him. But you can see with Sean Connery's acting and through Roald Dahl's dialogue that he does have kind of a connection with this machine, and he treats her like the lady she is.
Little Nelly got a hot reception. 4 big shots made improper advances towards her, but she defended her honor with great success, heading for home.
I love that so much, and thanks to a brilliant action sequence directed by Peter Hunt over the skies of Japan, Little Nelly really proves her own as a marvelous Bond vehicle. Moving on from Little Nelly, we have Wet Nelly from The Spy Who Loved Me. In a change of pace that began with Diamonds Are Forever, Bond once again drives a different brand of car, in this case, the Lotus. In fact, it's called the Lotus Esprit, and it is a very sleek-looking car for 1977. It's very aerodynamic. The white paint helps it stand out both in the water and on dry land, and as we discover, it has some little secrets of her own. She becomes a submarine. And how cool is that? A car that turns into a submarine. You got a Transformer before the Transformers were even around. And I love the fact that there are missiles hidden inside of this thing. It can create a smoke screen underwater. It can drive underwater as well as on land. It's just one of those fun little gadgets that you always associate with James Bond, and people still talk about this car. And once again, it was really cool to see lit up by a beautiful shimmering water effect at the Pearson Auto Museum. So Wet Nelly is definitely one of the best. Aston Martin called it the Vanquish. Q calls it the Vanish.
Oh, very good.
I still have such fond memories of seeing Die Another Day in the theaters back in 2002, and one of those highlights for sure was seeing that gorgeous Aston Martin Vanquish. Especially after years of not having the Aston Martin featured as the car in the movies, we got the newest and latest of Aston Martin, and it was a beauty. And it had so many hidden tricks in it. It was just a gorgeous piece to look at. One of the very few highlights of Die Another Day, in fact. And it led for a great chase against a Jaguar, another great car. This car is just so beautiful, and here's my model of it that I finally acquired. As you can see, it's sleek, its silver paint job is marvelous, perfectly capturing the original look of the Aston Martin DB5. This is just a great car. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage Volante from The Living Daylights. In a return to Aston Martin, and the last Aston Martin we would see for quite a while in the James Bond series, this was quite an unusual car to have. It was more of a coupe than it was a sports car. But don't let that fool you. Its brown paint job was perfectly placed against the snow and helped it to stand out. It has beautiful curves, it has rockets, it has skis. It's a great little car. It made me so sad to see it destroyed so quickly in favor of a let's face it, a violin joke, which admittedly I did find fun, but of course, when you have one against an Aston Martin Volante, you can easily see which one I would pick. Plus, I was thrilled to see that it would be featured in No Time to Die, and it was beautifully placed into the film. Even though it wasn't used particularly much, it was still wonderful to see it and get it given its due. And the number one best James Bond car is... oh, y'all know what it was. The Aston Martin DB5, baby. The absolute sexiest car to ever grace cinema, the Aston Martin DB5 had it all. A beautiful, sleek design, beautiful silver paint job with lots of hidden tricks from Q, which would become the standard for James Bond films to come. It had machine guns, rams, a bulletproof shield, it had an ejector seat, it had a smoke screen, an oil slick, spikes that came out of the bumper that you never saw, lots of hidden controls that never even made it to print. But you know what? It makes for such fun reading up on just what is inside this car. And this car has transcended its own appearance in Goldfinger, and it has become the kind of car that people associate with James Bond right off the bat. And I love to see it popping up occasionally in new films, and No Time to Die really gave it a showcase for just all the other things that it could do. And I just love that it just was the perfect way to start No Time to Die. Plus, I gushed over seeing this car at the Pearson Auto Museum. I just couldn't get enough of it, and I loved seeing it. I always loved seeing it in the Bond films. It is certainly a dream car that I hope to possess one day. But until then, I will settle on my childhood Corgi. Again, be careful where you launch this guy, otherwise you'll lose him. And those are the best James Bond vehicles. If there's some that I left out, let me know. If there's some that you think that I ranked a little too highly or too lowly, let me know in the comments and we'll have a talk. But until then, I'm Jim Crowley. This is Bond-tober.